Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Education Corner podcast would like to welcome Mrs. Alison Fleming, head at Newton Prep School, London. Established in 1991, Newton Prep is a co-educational prep school for children aged 3 to 13, located in Battersea, London. The school is unashamedly ambitious for its pupils and encourages them to take part in a wide range of activities, as well as achieving excellent academic results. The school boasts excellent facilities, including an all-weather pitch, several specialist sports halls, and science labs and large auditoriums and recital halls, supporting pupils to excel in all areas of the curriculum. Alison Fleming has been head at Newton Prep for 12 years and was previously head of junior school at Dulwich College. This is her final year as head at Newton Prep, and it has recently been announced that Mr. Graham McCavity, current head of Rosemary Preparatory School, will be taking over from September 2025. It's such a pleasure to have you, Alison, with us on our podcast. Firstly, can you tell us about your background and how you came to be head at Newton Prep?
I think maybe it's not a totally common background amongst heads of independent schools. I wasn't educated privately myself. State primary school, state grammar school was my background. And in many ways, I had no intentions, no plans really to come into the independent sector. And I think this was a moment where I guess the decision was slightly led by my own children. My older son started at our local primary school. And quite quickly, I began to feel a little bit dismayed as he was in a reception class of over 30 children. And back in the day, there were some teaching methods that I found curious. There was something called emergent writing, where you weren't really told anything about how to write. You just sort of did it by osmosis, I think, and learning by real books, but no reading schemes. And he used to come home from school and say, "But Mummy, how do you spell those words? How do you write these things properly?" But I kind of rolled with all of that. And then there came a point where a vacancy became available at an independent school. And after quite a lot of quite lively conversations with my husband, who was not at all keen on the whole independent sector decision, I went to teach at a local prep school, which, crudely speaking, brought with it some fee remission for having my children there. And that's how we ended up in a prep school. So that is not, I'm afraid, terribly idealistically driven, but that is just pragmatically how I ended up in a prep school. We lived then down in Southampton, and that's where the children were brought up. And then I think I came to a point where I felt I did want to become a head, but I suspected it wasn't going to be a head in Hampshire or Wiltshire, but it was going to be a London head. There was still something of the residual headmaster and his wife out in the Shire counties. And that certainly is not my vibe. I wasn't going to be making match teas or doing first aid at fixtures. So I thought London was where I was most likely to end up. But I also knew that the London world was very different from being out in Hampshire. And so initially I came to London and became the deputy head at Highgate Junior School. I'd been on an inspection team actually as a team inspector, and I discovered that area of North London through inspecting a school up there, and thought, wow, this is very different. I'd be really interested in that. So I did a couple of years at Highgate and had a wonderful time there. And my goodness, became acquainted with the North London parents and the demands that were in place. And it was a world away from being in Hampshire. So I'm very pleased I did that deputy headship initially, and then saw the advertisement for the head of Dulwich College's junior school, and was delighted to go and work there at the college. And then after 4 years there, came to Newton Prep. So a slightly circuitous route, came from, as I say, Shire counties, came via North London, and then here I am at Newton.
In your head's welcome on the school website, you say boys and girls learn together and play together. That seems to me the right way of things. What do you feel are the benefits of a co-educational setting?
I think in some ways the short answer to your question is I've worked in single-sex schools, of course, working at Dulwich, and I can kind of be convinced of arguments, both sides of the Rubicon, really, as far as single-sex or co-ed is concerned. But I think where I land, really, is that co-educational is normal life. And I think schools should reflect the reality of children's existence. And I think, if anything, actually, with all that's gone on with the whole Me Too movement and all that happened around that topic, I think actually it is vitally important that boys and girls learn what it is to be alongside each other in their learning environment, to work together, to play together, to go to play dates, birthday parties together, to just be friends with each other. So for me, that's my conclusion, is this is a reflection of reality and normal life. And that doesn't mean to say that there aren't issues along the way, but our job as educators is to journey with the children and help them to sort out any differences that might come along.
The school website quotes Isaac Newton, "My powers are ordinary, only my application brings me success." Could you tell us more about this message and the ethos and values at Newton Prep?
I think, and I am certain this comes from my own background, really. I came from what I describe as a modest middle class background. I'm not making any claim to having lived in poverty. I certainly didn't. My father was born in a coal mining village in South Wales, and he was very much my example, which is, he used to say to me all the time, "Alison, education is your passport. That is what's going to take you to new places." And I suppose for my own life, I wasn't surrounded by other members of my family who had been to grammar school, and nobody in my family had been to university. And I was driven, I suppose, by my father's message throughout my childhood about education being the passport. And I think I've taken that with me, whether I was starting my educational professional life working in a state primary school, which is where it all began, or when I've worked at these much more academically selective schools, Highgate and Dulwich, and here at Newton. I think it's largely a misapprehension to think that children are born gifted. Now, there will be an occasional child who comes along and you think, wow, that is an extraordinary talent. But for the vast majority of children, you will succeed by effort and application. Things are not just going to fall into your lap by right. And I think one of the things I feel very strongly about is children who come to Newton Prep. They are already born lucky. They're born lucky because they've been born to parents who can afford an education like this. They've been born to parents who are interested in their educational lives. And we all know that when we look at children's performance at school, one of the major KPIs is the involvement and engagement of their parents. So given that children turn up at Newton Prep already advantaged over many children, sadly, I think then after that, the values that I want to, in a sense, support in this school is that you work hard. So you approach your lessons, you form good and mutually respectful relationships with the staff, you listen to what you're being asked to do, you give of your very best, and you don't accept mediocrity. So I suppose, to pick up the Isaac Newton quotation, I think it is true to say that very, very few, like a microscopic percentage of people, are born with an extraordinary power or ability. But for the vast majority of us, it is going to be by hunkering down and giving of our very best efforts. And that is certainly the way I encourage the children. And I try in some small way to even demonstrate that. So 5 years ago or so, I decided to start learning the piano as an absolute beginner. And I've used that as an example many times with the children to say, I wanted to believe I could be a gifted pianist, that I could, after a couple of years, sit down and bash out a grade 8 piece and it would be amazing. And of course, what have I discovered? It's hard work. And if I don't practice, I don't make progress. And I use that as an example with the children a lot, that it has taken everything in my powers to get to grade 5 piano. And I'm fiercely proud of that, but it's darned hard work. And I suppose just demonstrating that to the children, to say, even when you're the head of a big school, learning a new skill is not a given. I have no superpowers. The only way I'm going to learn piano is by hunkering down and doing my practice and following the instructions of my teacher and doing my best.
Agree more. I've still got a piano next to me, I think. And could you tell us a little bit about the key entry points and the admissions process at Newton Prep?
So I suppose our two major entrance points are nursery and reception. So we would typically take about 48 children into nursery, and then the following year, in a normal year, but we'll talk about this a little bit later, we realise we're not quite in normal times at the moment, but in a normal year, maybe 45 or so of those children would come up to reception, and then we would be looking for another 35 children or so to come into reception. And that sets up the model then for the rest of the school, 4 classes of about 20 children. Now, inevitably, over time, families, as they journey through those pre-prep years, it may be that families then move out of London or move abroad for an assignment or something. And so we will then usually have a few places in year 3. And then after that, at the end of the whole 11 plus process, when we lose a number of our girls, particularly going off to the London day schools, we will then take some new children into year 7. So our primary point of entry, nursery and reception, but then we will be looking for sort of a small number of children to fill vacancies that have been left in year 3 and year 7.
I imagine at reception and nursery level, they're just observed playing, aren't they? And then as it goes further up the school, there might be some maths and English.
Exactly right. So nursery, we have the children in for a little play date. I suppose one of the things I say to parents is at Newton Prep, the pitch and pace of what we're doing is ambitious. And therefore, I need to be satisfied when children come into nursery that they are meeting normal developmental milestones. Because if they are not, then I think the chances are they would find the pitch and pace of what we offer will put them under a great deal of stress. But you're right, there is very little you can say about a child's academic potential when they come for an assessment with us age 2.5. And I think that would be a false claim. Entry into reception is a little more formal. The children come and then they play a bit, and then we make it so that their parents then will disappear and will head off, and we'll keep them for about an hour or so with us. And we will ask them to talk about a toy that they might have brought with them. And so we want a little bit to find out about what their use of language is like, and then also their received language, how they respond to instruction. We will put them in a little group and see how they play with each other. And of course, many of the children coming into reception will be at one of the London nursery schools. And so they will give us a little reference, which can certainly give all sorts of supporting help in making a decision about whether we make an offer to those children. Entry into year 3 and year 7 is more formal because I've got to be sure they at least fit within what we've got here at Newton Prep. And you know this very well as a mother of 2 children who navigated that London senior school entry process. We've got to be sure that the children we take into year 3, that as far as you can possibly predict, that we're going to be able to send them off to a really good senior school at age 11 or at age 13. So it is far more of an academic assessment when they're coming into the prep part of the school.
The vision of your founder, Dr. Farouk Wouji, was to provide the children in our care with a first-rate 21st century education, which has a lasting impact beyond their school years. We know that many parents are increasingly interested in how pupils are being taught life skills beyond academics. How do you feel you're incorporating these life skills and preparing the students for the future?
I think this is a really interesting question because, of course, a school like Newton Prep, as are all the prep schools in London, or in the country actually, we are, of course, by very nature, we are prepping children for entrance exams at 11 or at 13. But what I believe that we are committed to here at Newton Prep is about something that's so much more than just exam preparation. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, we go for that in a big way and make sure that when children do sit those selective exams, they're absolutely ready for it. But what we want to make sure is that we are, I guess, addressing the concerns and the issues that are relevant and pertinent to this generation of children. So our curriculum, we will adapt. We are not a school that's got the same curriculum plans in place year in, year out. We want to make sure that children have got the opportunity to discuss and to debate issues that are relevant to them, issues that they feel really strongly about. We want to make sure that there is creativity in the curriculum. And I think in the current circumstances, and certainly there has been so much pressure put on schools, and certainly for a lot of my colleagues in the maintained sector, of music and drama and the arts being squeezed out, really. And we know that we want to provide those wonderful opportunities for our children to do art and music and drama and to develop that creative side of their personalities. Because I think, curiously, creativity and the ability to adapt and to think new things, those are the sort of skills these children will need in the workplace that they're going to occupy. We want to make sure that children can talk about well-being, not that they feel that there's any stigma attached to it, but we all know that when we feel happy and confident and well-adjusted and comfortable in our own skin, that's what leaves us free to be able to then learn new things without fear of failure, without fear of getting things wrong, but willing to experiment and drive forward. So I think what I would say about Newton Prep is I don't think we are a very traditional prep school in that sense. I think we are a school that's adaptive, a school that's about looking at this generation of children and making sure that we offer them is something that's relevant and pertinent to the lives that they lead, actually.
School's vision statement says, we celebrate the diversity of our pupils. We want our children to develop a strong sense of community, learning how to make a positive contribution to the community of Newton Prep and the world around them. In a diverse and global city like London, how do you embrace and incorporate this diversity into school life? And it is something that's very noticeable at Newton, I will say that.
Absolutely. And I suppose what I love about this school is that we are not a sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant school. We are a school that very much draws families from a range of ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds. And I think that is greatly to the enrichment, I think, of the whole school community. Because, of course, these parents, they are bringing up children who may not even go to university in this country. Whatever world of work they go into, the chances are that they're going to work in other parts of the world at some point in their career. So for me, the idea that you sit alongside people who don't share the same traditions as you do at Christmas time or in the summer or whatever it is that you do, I think is a wonderful thing. I think the subtle point of difference, though, is we are not an international school. And I think there is a big difference there, because an international school, there is a lot of volatility around the pupil role, with big numbers of children shipping out at the end of the school year. Now, we will certainly lose some at the end of each school year as families move abroad or move out of London. But we've got many, many families who will go the distance. You know, children will come here in nursery and they won't finish until 13 and they'll do the full 10 years here. And the only reason I say that is because I think parents would want to know that their children are going to make friendships that will go a distance. You know, they don't risk making friends with somebody who's gone by the end of the year. So we are diverse for sure, but we're not an international school. The other bit that I would say is this sense of community. I absolutely love this world of Newton Prep, because I think what we try and do is we encourage the children to be part of the community of this school. If you like, one of the dangers, I think, in the independent sector is children can be very me-ish because they're from, generally speaking, reasonably wealthy or well-off parents, and they're aspirational. And I'm not saying that the success of every individual child isn't important. Of course it is. But our school community is about where we celebrate the success of every child. And the school isn't just a collection of individuals. Actually, the school is something about a community. It means something that we are all together and that we celebrate success and we journey together through the school year. I think the fact that the PTA is very grounded in that sense of community. So it's not ostentatious what the PTA does. It's Christmas fair, summer fair, PTA quiz night. You know, it's lovely things that bring the community together. And I think the bonds that the children form in their time at Newton Prep are really strong. And it's been absolutely delightful, actually, just this term that we had a number of ex-pupils wanting to come back for a play that was put on by our year 7s and 8s. This week we've had a couple of boys who were at St Paul's, and St Paul's I think must have had an inset day, and their boys were allowed to come some, and they spent the day with us yesterday. And there was recently a couple of girls who were at Charterhouse, and they had an Exeat weekend, and so they came up to see me on Friday afternoon. And I suppose that speaks of the fact that many old Newtonians love the community, really loved being part of it, and still want to come back and stay in touch. And that's very special to me.
You also have the Newton Prep Diploma, which runs alongside your academic and co-curricular offerings. Could you tell us a little bit more about the programme and how it benefits the pupils?
So when I first came to Newton Prep 11 and a half years ago, really the curriculum for the pupils who stayed for years 7 and 8 was all about common entrance. And I've got to be absolutely honest here in the way I tend to be. I found it dull, really dull, the common entrance programme of study. And one of the reasons I disliked it is because I think it forced children to learn in a way that I don't think you learn best. It forced children to learn in subject silos that were fundamentally not related to each other. We all know as adults, we learn best when we're making connections. So I went out, this is probably now about 9 years ago. I went out to all the heads of senior schools that we send children to and said, look, I am not loving common entrance for our pupils in years 7 and 8. You now get to choose most of your pupils through the pre-test process. And then it seems quite wrong that you are dictating the curriculum we've got to put our kids through in years 7 and 8. What if we gave you a compromise of maths, English, science and a language, but you left us to do our humanities our way? And I was absolutely thrilled to bits because the responses I had overwhelmingly, not quite 100%, but very, very big majority of senior school heads said, absolutely, go for it. And that's what we've done. So the Newton Diploma is a way of bringing together the humanities subjects, art, and then this year, very excitingly, I've got an absolutely stunningly good head of classics, and she wants to be part of this Newton Diploma. So what it means is now the children still being taught by really well qualified subject specialist teachers, but we are now looking at the sort of whole topics that work together from a RS or philosophical point of view, from a historical point of view, geography and art and classics feeding in. So for instance, one of the topics the children do is looking at London population and settlements over the years, looking at growth, looking at Roman Britain, looking at the growth of Christianity in this country. And then as we go forward in time, looking at the diversity of London, looking at multiculturalism, looking at some of the topics around that, about what it means to be British in this country, what it means actually to be British in London, and the children having the opportunity to explore and debate all of these topics. And the children love it. And at the end of the day, they will end up with a gold, silver or bronze award, depending on what extra they've brought to this diploma. But for me, this has allowed us to do something innovative, really special for our pupils who stay in year 7 and 8. And then when they go to their senior schools in year 9, of course, it's not long before they have to make those GCSE options. And so they've had 2 wonderful years of being able to explore all of the humanities and art and classics all linked together. And it's been a terrific thing, actually.
As you've already mentioned, and as I know as a parent, your pupils go on to a wide range of top senior schools in London and across the country. How are pupils at Newton Prep prepared for and supported through what we both know is an incredibly competitive entrance exam process that they're all currently in the middle of?
It's incredibly stressful for the pupils and their parents. I often say to parents, it's tough, isn't it? Because you are putting out there your darling child who you love with all your heart, and you're putting your child out there to be offered or rejected places by senior schools, and it's very tough. So I suppose there are a few things that I would want to say. One is, in a way, from the minute the children first come to Newton Prep, we've got the notion of those senior school exams in our mind. Now, I don't mean that the children live with that as a daily reality. That would be absolutely dreadful for them. But we know what the standards are, and we know what those senior schools want from us. I'm fairly direct with parents. We don't prepare children for 7+ and 8+ exams because, again, I just don't want little children constantly having to do exam practice. Education is broader than that. What does it mean for us, though? It means our curriculum is ambitious and it's pacey, and it means that we know that we've covered all the content that those senior schools are going to present us with in those exams. As far as parents are concerned, we meet with parents, give a load of information about schools that Newton Prep children go to, and a few things that ought to govern your choice. We try really, really hard to discourage parents from thinking only of top schools. And I think even looking at that actually in this question, I think probably I ought to change that on our website, because top schools isn't quite right. I think fundamentally what we're looking for is right school for right child. And that might be one of the most academically elite schools, and we all know who they are, but actually it might not be. It might be a school that's got a broader academic range, and that might be the right school for a child to thrive in. So what we do from year 5, so I guess from the time the children are 9 turning 10, is that we give a huge amount of information to parents about the process. And then one of my deputy heads and me, we will sit with parents on a one-on-one basis and say, okay, what are your priorities? Is it co-ed, single sex? Are you definitely going at 11? Would you consider 13? Would you consider boarding school, or is that absolutely off the agenda? Now let's have a little look at the data. What looks realistic? And we try and pull together, and I know this sounds a bit corporate, but maybe pull together a strategy perhaps of half a dozen schools that look realistic. Maybe a couple that with a fair wind on a good day at the office, you stand a good chance of getting a place at, 2 or 3 that look realistic, and maybe one that doesn't absolutely float your boat, but you'd be happy with that. And then it's very much working with parents. We're together on this. Our aims are the same. We want the children to go off to the right school for them. So I guess that's what I would say. A lot of preparation academically for the children, and a lot of metaphorical hand-holding for parents as they journey through potentially a really stressful couple of years in their children's lives.
And it's so ever-changing, isn't it? You know, the exams, the dates, the styles. You have to keep on top of everything that's happening. Many parents may be concerned about the introduction of VAT to school fees next year. It's obviously starting in January. How are you supporting parents through this, and what advice would you give to those who are worried?
I've got to be honest, I think this imposition of VAT on school fees, it could make me cry, actually. I think it's one of the saddest political moves that the Labour government could have made, and I am so dismayed about it. I think for me, and then I will answer your specific question about how we are actively supporting or trying to support families with this extraordinary fee increase. For me, the great sadness is this. If the Labour government had said, which is true, that it is unfair that certain children have these amazing opportunities, I wouldn't disagree with them. It is unfair. And I would love, when I think back to my own modest schooling, I'd love to have gone to a school like some of these senior schools. There's no way my parents could have paid for it. Of course it's unfair. So you either go for the Labour view, which is because it's unfair, do you know what we'll do? We'll charge VAT. And I mean, I'm not a VAT tax expert, but my understanding is no other country, certainly in Europe, taxes school fees. You do that, which is we are going to impose 20%. We are going to put school fees out of the reach of many working parents. And if schools go to the wall, we don't care, which is kind of what I think Labour think. I don't think they would mind if we close. They don't like us, they don't like what we stand for, and they'd be very happy for us to close. So you can do that. Or wouldn't this have been a better idea? What if you'd actually had a look and there'd been together a group, a committee of some sort, and said, what is it then about this group of children? Only 7% of children are educated privately. What is it about this group of children that makes them disproportionately successful? Because it isn't that they're all clever. As I said, we take children into nursery and we assess them when they're aged 2.5. I've no idea how clever they're going to be academically, and none of us do. Any of us who run a prep school with a pre-prep, none of us know how clever the children are going to be. So it can't be that our children are successful because they were born clever, because it's not true. Is it as crudely as if your parents have got a certain amount of disposable cash, your child is going to do well academically? That may be a factor. I doubt that that's the main thing. So what are the other things that we offer? Could it be the extended day? Could it be that children can be dropped off in many of our schools, a school like this, dropped off at 8 o'clock and picked up at 5:15, which is our day. And I am certain that that is a major, major factor. Why? Because we can control what the children eat. They're not eating rubbish. We can control their access to mobile devices. We can make sure they are not on social media. There are no smartphones here. They can just concentrate on their learning, on playing together, on their face-to-face interactions with each other. I am so dismayed that there wasn't an intelligent discussion about our children and what makes them do so well. Could it be that we are schools where that sense of community is so strong, where we also think about the world outside? We give to Wandsworth Food Bank, we give toys to a local primary school. Is it something to do with values? You either go for a sort of communist model of everybody gets the same, or you let people buy into something that resonates for them. I would have gone for, if I'd been in politics, which I'm not, but what about if you'd said every single independent school in the country, whatever your size, you've got to give away now 10% of your places. Now, I know that anyone who's listening to this podcast will say, well, my school already has got lots of bursaries, and I know many schools have, but many haven't. In a school like mine, it would have meant 65 children. We could have said, give away 65 places to children from the local community. Let them come in and do what we do here. Let them benefit from what's here. And I think there could have been so many more creative means of addressing this instead of slapping 20% on, squeezing on fees, squeezing out many families who are just working darn hard to try and afford this opportunity for their children. And it's such a clumsy, clunky response to the independent sector. What's going to happen, of course, which I'm assuming Labour are quite happy about, is the independent sector is going to become even more exclusive. So it'll be even more for the rich. It'll be even more for international families who, whether their companies are paying fees, I'm not quite sure how that works. But what you are going to lose, I suspect, is many families who are just working their hardest to do the best for their kids. And as I said right at the beginning of my little rant, I could cry over this. I think it's one of the saddest, most short-sighted, tin-eared things that Labour could possibly have done. And I hope they live to regret it, because I think this is dreadful. It is not dreadful to try and address inequality. That is not dreadful. They are right to address inequality. They are right. But this is the wrong means, in my view. In terms of what we're doing for our families, we've not handed on the whole 20% of the costs, as with lots of independent schools, handed on some of the costs, but not all. But it will be the breaking point for a number of families. And not just here at Newton, it is in all prep schools. It is going to be the breaking point. But, if Rachel Reeves is listening to this, she'll probably say, good. I'm quite happy if it would be the breaking point. I'm no fan of the independent education system.
I think it's also going to put incredible pressure on the maintained sector as well.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. It's going to put pressures on them. And I suppose to go back to my point, which may not have been credible, I don't know. But if every single independent school in the country had taken 10% of children, we could all have drawn in some of those children and given them the benefit of these wonderful, life-changing, transformative opportunities that our schools offer.
This is your last year as head of Newton Prep, and it was recently announced that Graham McCafferty will be taking over as head from September 2025. What are you most proud of throughout your time at Newton Prep, and what are your hopes for the future of the school?
Gosh, that's a really good question. So I suppose what I'm most proud of, I am really proud of the academic excellence. And what I mean by that is I am so proud of my teachers. They are absolutely outstanding. To work alongside such a committed, dedicated teaching staff who are absolutely plan their lessons, assess their lessons, teach their lessons with such gusto and enthusiasm, with that we want this to be the absolute best it can be. So when I talk about academic excellence, it doesn't mean that every child is Westminster or St Paul's bound. I don't mean that. But I mean that what we do in every lesson, whether it's from nursery up to year 8, whether it's in English or in music, we want to offer the children the absolute best that we can. lots of heads in these situations, you end up resorting to truisms. I realise that. But I'm just driven by the fact that there is no rewind button. This is it. This is their precious childhood. It's got to be the best that it can be. I suppose the second point I'm really proud of is I've always felt that part of my role as a head is to encourage and, if you like, nurture the next generation of heads. And so I am very proud of the fact that a number of my deputy heads have gone on to headship. Chris Skelton is the headmaster of Newland House, Vicky Goodson, Jags Prep School, Mike Bryant at St Albans High School for Girls, their junior school, Tom Quilter at Bickley Park, Chris Woodward, head of Bassett House. And I'm just very proud of that. I want the staff who come here, they're ambitious, and I want them to be ambitious. I want them to take on positions of responsibility, head of house, head of year, head of subject. I want that for them. And then ultimately deputy headship, so that then when the time comes that they've had all the sort of educational life experience to make them outstanding heads of their own schools.
And do you have any plans for yourself going forwards?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a question. So I guess I really, really want to stay in the world of education. It's my love. And even though I am now of a certain age, I have never stopped loving seeing children learn, watching them learn, being part of that learning journey. I don't think I will go on to take on another headship, but I would love to be involved in some way, whether it's nurturing new heads, whether it's helping heads who find themselves in difficult situations. I would love to do something. Now that Graham's been appointed, so my successor has been appointed, then I guess post-Christmas, it gives me a bit of time to think about what might be next for me next September.
Very exciting, Alison, and it's so lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much for being on our podcast.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.